The FBI says it is worried about its accuracy. Trump's Justice Department, they don't want this report to come out, but President Trump, he's ready to daylight the infamous Nunes memo about the FBI's handling of his case. Our panel of attorneys here to look at that and a bunch of other legal stories. And the president has said he talked to Bob Mueller, but his attorneys aren't letting him. Well, could they subpoena the President of the United States? We'll talk about that. And if the answer is no, the president says, then what happens? And then later, Bob Menendez, Dean Skelos, Shelley Silver, all three face federal corruption charges, but all are still free men. Two of them will get retried. We'll explain surprising news today as to who won't. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and as you just heard off the top here, we've got a packed hour. Plus, we'll talk to Cokie Roberts about the State of the Union address last night later in the program. But we begin with the Nunes memo. Now, the FBI has issued a very rare public statement about what we believe will be in the offing shortly. I'm going to read a portion of what the FBI had to say. The FBI was provided a limited opportunity to review this memo the day before the committee voted to release it. As expressed during our initial review, we have grave concerns about the material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. Now, President Trump's own Justice Department, again, folks Trump appointed here, they say it would be irresponsible to ever release it. Again, their words. But President Trump, he still wants to move ahead. Here he is last night after the State of the Union.
Yeah, you got his attention.
Great speaking. Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Oh, don't worry. 100%. Can you imagine that?
Don't worry, 100%. And again, he hasn't read it, of course. Now, the memo purports to show that the FBI abused its power when it used the Fusion GPS opposition dossier to obtain a warrant to surveil Carter Page. Page, as you remember, was a Trump campaign advisor who has been investigated by Mueller, the FBI, and many others. Now, there is rising speculation that Nunes consulted with the White House on the memo, but he has refused to even answer questions about it, so we don't know if, in fact, he's done this. And if this sounds familiar, it should. This is not the first time the congressman has worked directly with the administration. You may remember last year, Nunes said he had a bombshell, a secret intelligence report that backed Trump's claims that he had been wiretapped by the Obama administration. Later we learned, by the way, when he's standing in front of the White House, that there was a good reason for that. The papers came from the White House. Nunes then had to recuse himself from the Russia probe, but apparently that was then and this is now. He's back, and he is still not playing nice when it comes to the other side of the aisle. Democrats say, wait a minute here. This isn't remotely true. We have our own report. Let's release them together. But Mr. Nunes and others said, nice try, no chance. Jim Himes, one of the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, and last night, we were on Capitol Hill, obviously, for the State of the Union address, and our own Andrew Whitman, he caught up with the Connecticut congressman to ask about where we are with the memo and why the Democrats are not releasing their version as well.
What's the big concern here, that Republicans are going to try to use this to make a move on Rod Rosenstein, or that they're now launching an investigation into the DOJ? How concerned should people be?
Well, there's two concerns. One is this is the latest installment in a months-long effort to throw mud on the FBI and the Department of Justice. This started with Devin Nunes' midnight run to the White House to get information that he then turned around and said that perhaps Donald Trump was being surveilled. This was the accusations of improper unmasking, which of course amounted to nothing. This is about delegitimizing Bob Mueller's investigation, so that if Bob Mueller comes up with something, they can say, oh yeah, but it wasn't a fair investigation. The other thing that I have to mention is, quite apart from the partisan aspect of this, there's classified information that could compromise investigations, could compromise the national security of the United States, and the Republicans refuse to let the DOJ or the FBI come in and talk about that and are releasing that into the public.
I know there's a Democratic memo that you and others on the committee want to have released. Does it counterpoint all of the claims in the Nunes memo? Does it completely, in your mind, make the Nunes memo less relevant?
Well, it refutes the Nunes memo. And when people see the Nunes memo, it won't take them long to realize that it's a pretty shoddy piece of work. The Democratic memo goes allegation by allegation, talking point by talking point, and refutes them, and actually points to things that are in the classified intelligence, things that are not in the classified intelligence, but it is a very detailed 38-footnote document that really shows the Republican memo for what it is, which is a series of misstatements and misdirections.
Is that going to get released whether the committee votes to release it or not?
Well, again, the information inside the memo is classified, so we would hope that the Republicans would treat the Democratic memo exactly the same way they treated their own memo in the interest of fairness and transparency. Let the American public decide. Something tells me that there might be a few slips on the way to that happening because, again, the Democratic memo really shows how the Republican memo is faulty and not accurate.
Given the developments on the House Intelligence Committee that we've been talking about, but then also Andy McCabe leaving his position at the FBI, I'm hearing from some Democrats saying that there's a sense of lawlessness. Others are talking about a potential constitutional crisis. How would you describe the state of, I guess, everything surrounding this, and how concerned are you? How concerned should we be?
We should be concerned. It's not like the FBI or the Department of Justice are immune from criticism, but these are institutions that are terribly important to our country. They are about law enforcement. They are populated by good, patriotic people who could be making a lot more money doing other things elsewhere, and you are now watching these two institutions full of very good people being tarred, not because there's evidence that they did anything wrong, but tarred with falsehoods in order to support the president.
And there's more news today. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, again, Trump appointed him, supposedly he has mentioned as well in the memo that, as CNN is reporting, Trump asked him whether he's, quote, on my team during a meeting just last month. Again, if this sounds like a pattern, it should. Remember when fired FBI Director James Comey said Trump asked him to take a loyalty oath? He's also asked the soon recently displaced Andrew McCabe, Deputy FBI Director who just, quote-unquote, retired, who in fact McCabe voted for. Now, we are just waiting for the Nunes memo to be released. I believe it's going to happen. The White House says, in fact, it will be done, quote-unquote, pretty soon. Let's bring in our panel right now. A lot to unpack here. Doug Von Ois, the founding partner of Carson Von Ois, focusing on corporate misconduct. He was selected by Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the country and a former prosecutor in his own right. Same for Jimmy Kasouras. He now a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. He sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Associations, and he frequently lectures at both New York Law School and the Bar Association in Queens and New York City. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC, and a former prosecutor and chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office, and Daniel Goldman, a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. And Dan, listen, we're all given to hyperbole, especially guys like me who do this for a living, but just this little snapshot in time, if it was going to be Exhibit A for what we've seen in the past year, this so concerned, this Nunes memo, forget about the Democrats on the committee. The FBI director and the assistant director, Trump appointees, literally went over and they sat down with Nunes and they said, listen, at least let us brief you on the intelligence. He had never read the intel before he came up with this memo that his aides apparently wrote. And then they pleaded with him, don't do this. This is dangerous. This is against national interest. There is a process that we go through. You can't do this, and you have your information wrong. Apparently, they then also not only went to the Justice Department, to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General, appointed, the acting by the president, said, you're right, guys. We shouldn't do this. And the president overruled them both, and you saw the soundbite here. Andrew asked the question, I heard others say this. There's a fear of lawlessness where we have institutions right now that the public has to count on. I don't care what political party you believe in. And right now, they're becoming part of the soup of a partisan fight where we're not worried about finding to the bottom of what the probe was designed to do, who did what, but how we can use information to protect the president. How worried should we be?
Well, I think we should be worried for several reasons. Obviously, there's the political partisan angle to this, which it's quite clear that Devin Nunes' history has shown that that's what his angle is, and what he's trying to perpetrate with this memo shows that as well. But when you unpack the FBI's statement a little bit, it gets very interesting, because what this memo is designed to summarize is an application for a warrant to surveil Carter Page, who they were concerned was an agent of Russia. Okay? When you go to a judge with a warrant application, you have to show probable cause that there's reason.
This is for the FISA court.
This is for the FISA court. This is for any court, but certainly for the FISA court. And the standards and the process to go to a FISA court are actually more onerous than if a prosecutor were just to go to an Article III judge for a regular search warrant. But you have to show probable cause. And what the FBI is saying in their statement today is that because it is misleading and there are omissions, that is critical to probable cause. If you're summarizing a memo and you don't include something that amounts to probable cause, and then you're trying to say there wasn't probable cause or it was overly reliant on unsubstantiated allegations from the Steele dossier, you're leaving out all of the critical evidence. And that's what's misleading. And the result is you have, for a political purpose, somebody who is feeding the president information that he can use to discredit and undermine the FBI and ultimately the Justice Department, because the Justice Department has to sign off on this warrant application. And so it's a dual track thing where the president is able to use Nunes's memo to undermine the Justice Department and potentially undermine the investigation into the president himself.
Without them getting a chance to respond. See, what Dan is saying is so important. This is such a political ploy. It is wrong for so many reasons. So what is the poor FBI and DOJ supposed to do now? They're not going to come out and say, wait a minute, but this was in and this was in. They're not going to disclose.
Because they can't.
They can't. So this thing comes out. They make, political nonsense of it. And DOJ is sitting there with their hands tied because they can't do what they're telling the administration not to do. They can't disclose
and just with
this
any
information.
investigation, whether it's at the local level, state, federal level, whatever else, we have different bodies of legislation, in addition to independent prosecutors, as the case might be, where they do probes and investigations. Just step back for a second and just think about if there was at the grade school they're doing this. If you're appointing a committee, and again, what was the committee charged to do? To find out if not only did the Russians interfere with our elections, which was the crux of their job, but was there any interference and was there any participation by anyone involved here? Was justice obstructed? Was there collusion? Whatever else. Now, we all believe that Bob Mueller and team are the right people to do this in the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees. They still have a role. But nobody thought the role was for Devin Nunes to go run to the White House, who are the subjects that are under investigation in part, and work with them on the statement to go out and do it. And then, in the same sentence that they say the word transparency, they say, okay, we're going to put out the information we like, and we haven't even read the intel file, and we're not going to give the other side of it because, well, that's not the transparency we want. But Mayo, for the President of the United States to say, you know what, I know I'm under investigation. I know the FBI and the Justice Department, my Justice Department, in his words, okay, doesn't want me to do this. I'm still going to do it. To me, that's the scary part here, where even after he's long gone here, we've now thrown the FBI and the Justice Department into the political football game in this dysfunctional world that is Washington. That's not healthy.
Well, it's not healthy, and it doesn't matter even if the FBI is able to respond. I mean, you're not looking at a trial where you're going to go to court and you're going to have witnesses and you're going to actually get a resolution. What it does is it undermines confidence in the FBI, undermines confidence in the justice system across the board. And what I find extremely ironic is that over the last year or so, we've been talking about whether it's a good idea to have a FISA courts in the first place, and all of the things that we discussed were dismissed by the people who now are crying foul. But either you're going to have it or you're not going to have it. You have standards, you don't have standards. It's also the fact that you're willing to compromise classified information for political gain. And anytime you get to the point where you have any individual, any president, any member of Congress who puts himself or herself above the country, it's a crisis.
And Doug, let's strip this to the end game, okay? One of the people that we believe will be mentioned in the Nunes memo, as it's now called, is Bistros, one of the folks at Justice who, with his then girlfriend, I don't know where they are now, they were traded texts and they were not flattering ones about Donald Trump. When brought to the attention of Bob Mueller, they were immediately removed from the case altogether. However, the connection that we believe that Nunes will make is, here was a guy out to railroad Donald Trump, and he perverted this investigation. And moreover, Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general, because Jeff Sessions had to recuse himself, he's been corrupted too because he took this corrupted information and tried to do an end round to go to the FISA court. The belief is, we've talked at length about that Trump has not only fired Comey, McCabe's been shown the door. He's talked repeatedly about firing Sessions. He's talked repeatedly, as recently as a few months ago, about firing even Bob Mueller. He wants Rosenstein gone because, as I said off the top, he's not on his team, okay? Where are we going with this? He believes he works for Trump, okay? If he makes a move on Rosenstein, clearly the message is he's going to put in his own guy who's going to be the person that Mueller's got to report to. That's really the end game here, don't we think?
Well, I mean, that's what everybody's speculating the end game here is. But if I can just take the other side for a second. This is very unusual because what this investigation is ultimately going to try to answer is whether something was improper. This will probably end up being, if something improper was done, an impeachment process, which is ultimately a political thing. So Trump is actually, his people are taking the only shot they can take at this point. They have to show, because when charges or recommendations come out, it's over at that point for him unless he has his counter narrative out.
You're making the assumption, though, that they take this route because they believe that when the report comes out, it's going to be so damning, with so much compelling evidence that there was both obstruction and or collusion, that he's got to muddy the waters now because he's dead in the water. It's when, not if.
Yeah, but toward what end? I mean, at some point, again, you have to stop and say Nixon didn't. At some point, Nixon said it's time to resign. I mean, for personal political gain, though, do you destroy the entire system based on politics?
With you, but my only point is, not too long ago, a year and a half ago, whatever it is, I sat here and I said, how dare Bill Clinton meet Loretta Lynch on a tarmac? And I don't care if they were talking about their kids', college experiences or whatever else.
And I agreed with you.
It looked completely improper. Yeah. And they were right, and she should have been removed. But the people screaming the loudest about this are the same people now who believe that an investigation should be basically convened and done to the benefit of the subject of the investigation. And to me, more importantly than all this silliness or stupidity, is at the end of the day, we still have to have the FBI. And for the public not to trust the FBI, which I know is imperfect, but still, that's not good for the American institution.
Why is anyone surprised? Donald Trump is the first president ever elected who neither served in the military nor served in public office. He did not, by all accounts, by his own account, run to be president in order to serve the country. He ran to be president in order to serve Donald Trump, and that is precisely the way he has acted since he was elected. And he views the executive branch the way he views the executive branch of the Trump organization. It's no different, and he has no notion.
You're
no
right,
sense
Dan.
of.
I guess the only thing I'll say is, I may surprise folks here, but I respect Paul Ryan. I respect others. I may disagree with a lot of policy moves, but for the people who claim to be the face of the law and order party, there's a rule of law that is being trampled right now, and certainly the intent that we have co-equal branches in this government, each with an important rule. To oversee and watch in real time the maligning of the entire Justice Department, including the FBI and everything else, again, is not in the national best interest. If the evidence isn't there, then we should move on. But if the evidence is there, it should be. And there can't be any third way here, and that's really what I think is so concerning. All right, when we come back here, will Bob Mueller ever interview President Trump? Well, the president some days says, hey, I'm ready. 100%. Just give me a call. 100% I'm there. His attorneys, though, not so sure it's a great idea. Could the president actually be subpoenaed? And what if he says, yeah, not going to show up? Then what? We'll talk about that after this.